Welcome to Tea Time with Shaylee and Amber. I'm Shaylee Evans, and I'm a life coach for pets and their people. I'm a truth seeker, and it's my passion to empower others and to give animals a voice along the way.
I'm Amber Leidick, and I've been a performance horse trainer focused on behavioral issues for over 20 years. My current passion is creating impactful in-person and online events and collaborating with professionals to be on the leading edge of positive change in the horse industry.
We are two friends invested in theta healing, belief system work, animal communication, and any resources that benefit human-animal partnerships. So turn up the volume and let's dive into the Great Awakening, brought to you by our horses. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast. Today we are super excited. I actually was so excited that I told Amber. Steffi told us that she's like a little under the weather, and I was like, I'm so excited for this conversation. I have to go for a run really quick to like tone my energy down. But we have Steffi with Science for Soundness. She is a equine scientist and therapist, and we're just so excited to talk to you. So thanks for joining us, Steffi. And would you mind just telling everyone a little bit about who you are and the work that you do?
Thank you so much for having me. I am super excited as well, actually. So I'm Steffi, or my whole name is Steffi Spielhaupter. You asked me to pronounce that. It's actually a German name, so it's a bit random. And I'm an equine scientist, and I kind of find myself on this journey with my horses, and I've always followed this path wanting to learn about horses. So I ended up here in the north of Germany, surrounded by my herd in a paddock paradise, and always continuing to learn from them, but also from all the horses I get to work with. And I absolutely love diving into the fine nuances that they present, really, and love explaining their horses to their owners. And I love kind of facilitating the communication between horse and owner, and oftentimes translating what the horses are actually going through, or actually saying, well, what I perceive them to be saying or doing in any particular moment. And that is often so interesting because owners sometimes feel a specific way about the horses. And I don't know about you guys, but if you're very close to an animal or a person, if you're very close to someone, then you get kind of blind spots, I think. And I just love shining a light on those blind spots and helping people communicating with the horses in a more subtle, more, I don't know, understanding, compassionate way, I think. Yeah.
I love that. And Amber was actually the one that found your Instagram and
Really?
sent me and she sent me a video. And we both went through, well, Amber went through a harder crisis after watching your video, but we both went through a little crisis of like,
Okay.
do we even know anything about horses? Do we know? And so I really want to get into that. But first, as we're talking about, you shining a light on these horses, I think it's really cool that your horse that brought you into this work is called Sun, and she was kind of your guiding light into all of your research and what you're doing now. And I just think it would be really cool to honor her for a little bit. And would you mind just speaking about your journey with her?
Of course. So Sun is a Tennessee walking horse, and I'm a German citizen. So I lived in Germany for most of my life, but lived in the UK for a while. And whilst I was in Germany, I got to know this lovely breed of Tennessee walking horses. And nobody knew of them or heard of them. And I was kind of the odd one out, having a gated horse from the US. But that kind of sent me on a journey on my own in a specific way, because no trainer was able to help me and nobody kind of understood the gaits and everything. So I was thrown in the deep end in a way. And on that journey, I realized, well, Sun was not a difficult horse, but she's got so much presence. She's very sure about herself, about what she is okay with and what she isn't okay with. So this was my first own horse. I had shared horses before, but not really ever owned a horse. So there I was. I had this beautiful horse, and she was like, nope, nope, nope. The whole time, everything was always, I'm not doing this. No, I'm going to do that, but I'm going to do it this way, not the way you want. And basically, I was lost for so long. And in the end, she moved with me to the UK. And over there, it was even more difficult to find a trainer or somebody who would understand the less traditional approach, I think. So I studied equine science. I was learning all these things about horses, couldn't find a person to teach me really, but tried to pick out everything that would help her become more present in a way, because she is very she's always lead mare, doesn't matter where we are and which kind of herd environment, she's always the lead mare. She's very highly strung, I think is what I'd put. So she's very energetic in a way, and I always struggle to calm her down. And I myself then got too stressed, and we got in this spiral so many times where she was frustrated and I was frustrated. And eventually on this journey, I found a few things, and I found working on myself would really help her in the long run to, you know, when I'm okay, when I'm at peace, when I'm grounded and all of that, then I can approach her in such a different way that we then can connect in such a beautiful way that I was never able to in the past. And actually, it wasn't just Sun. There was a little pony. She is not with me anymore, unfortunately. She died. But Bee, Sun's best friend, she was a little Exmoor from the UK. And with her, it was very much the same. She would always say no, but it was always a fight. It was always I don't trust humans, and I don't want to spend any time with you because you're not doing me any good. And I felt rejected by the pony the whole time. So where Sun was very forgiving with me, Bee was very harsh, very hurtful in a way at the beginning. But she also, alongside Sun, taught me that maybe it's not the obvious route that is always the best to take, because horses are so individual. Yes, they are horses, but still, as an equine scientist, I still question all these things that I've learned, because not everything that I've learned makes sense for every horse, and it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. And I think they both taught me that very much so, and kind of taught me that it takes a person to listen and be connected with themselves in order to be able to connect with the horse and then meet them on a completely different level. Yeah. Is that enough honoring?
Yeah.
Should we talk more about
yeah,
that?
that's totally good. And I love where you went with that too, because that's at the root of the work that Amber and I do as well, is like giving the power back to the people and really like
Yes.
being in tune with themselves. And the more you know about your mind, body, spirit, the more Amber always says, clear it so they don't have to. And it's like such a valid thing, because you know, we talk about them being our mirrors, but I mean, there really is so much that goes into that. So that's really cool that they brought you down this journey. And I often find that the horses who are the ones that put up a fight, that say no, are the ones that teach us so much. And I used to be frustrated with a few of my horses who are like that too, in particular. And and then I just started seeing such a different perspective, where I'm like, it's really cool of a non-predatory animal to be able to say, no, I'm not going to do that, and actually, you know, step into their power. But speaking of, Amber, do you want to speak a little bit about like us finding Steffi in our identity crisis with fawning? Because I feel like fawning is going to be such a cool topic to talk about.
So there was a point in my career, like I spent my career doing like performance horses with behavioral issues. So I would take these horses that were, you know, they were showing and then they would sort of fall apart. I would take them, fix them, you know, and then send them back. But I always knew there was this gap where the point I was at was that I didn't really like people and I wasn't connected with people. I wasn't connected with myself. I didn't understand that piece, but I knew that the people were the actual part that like I wasn't able to reach. So I knew that I could get into a certain space with them, and then I would send them back. And so through my own journey, I had stumbled on Dr. Joe Dispenza, and I was learning about nervous systems. And then I was like, I had this moment where I was like, oh, and then also Peter Levine's work. So like the two of those things sort of collided at the same time in human worlds. And I was like, oh shit, like, wait a minute. You know, I'm basically, I don't ever feel like no, that's a lie. There were times where I can look back and go, that was like full on abusive. But in my mind and when I was in it, it was like, this is just the way it is. This is the way I learned it. This is how you do it. And then the horses become good. And so when I started learning about the nervous systems and I started learning all this other stuff and then learning about like somatic experiencing and all this stuff, I was like, oh shit, like I'm basically actually putting trauma, like my training program is just this experience of putting trauma into horses. And then we also talked about the other day, like trauma not even necessarily being this big abusive thing, but Shaylee had told a story about, you know, she had stuff going on in her body from when she was in the dentist chair getting braces. It was never like this big thing, but it was like the moment where your nervous system says, I need to get out of this situation and I can't, right? So I think people go trauma and they're like, oh God, it has to be this big thing, where I was like, gosh, literally most of what I do is not giving the horses an out. And then when they would do what I want, you know, in traditional horsemanship, it was like, oh, okay, good job. And then so I knew about like fight or flight, right? And I knew about like, oh, I'm so smart now. Let me like change up what I'm doing. And then all of a sudden it was it was Denise, our astrologist friend, Denise, who had talked about fawning. And I was like, fawning? What the fuck is that? I thought there was fight or flight. And then, so it took me down that where I was like, and Shaylee this morning was like, we should just tell her that, that the video you sent was like, you've been fawning in every relationship that I've been in up to this point. So I could understand it from a human perspective. But then when I started to integrate it into what does that look like in horses, I was like, oh God. I was like, I can't go horses. I think I thought I had it figured out. No, I have no idea. And I can't go near them and I can't touch them. And so I went down this whole rabbit hole of, you know, like I have a horse that would never shut down, which was the greatest blessing, right? Like I started him, but sent him away to a trainer who I know was pretty harsh. Full good intentions, very talented trainer. But I knew when he came back, he was pissed, you know, he was performing, he was angry. And I was like, that's so interesting because he would never shut down. And I think when I look at my first horse compared to him, who I did shut down and who I did go show and we did well, I was like, oh, this is like the full on difference between these two. And then I started just like looking for videos, like, so we went this rabbit hole of, oh gosh, you know, I thought there was these two things. And then there was this other third world. And I was like, and we had talked about this morning, like, I know a lot of people, once they start to learn more about this stuff, they start to like pull back away from their horses. Like you start to worry, like, should I even be near you? You know, and so what is I'm just curious, like your perspective on the fawning and, you know, how do you help people understand it and what it looks like for, you know, basically all the things that I really needed to understand 6 months ago. I think I have it figured out, but I bet I don't. So you can talk on that.
First of all, I want to honor you for sharing that and for sharing so openly and vulnerably and saying, you know, looking back now that actually was abusive. I think we all, me included, have this kind of background because that was the done way. That was the way we were taught, and it was seen as normal to use horses. And I think where I come from, I wanted. And I think actually that sends a lot of people into an anxiety spiral or some kind of identity crisis, like you put it, because I want to see my horses eye to eye. I want to find a way that is not forceful, but I do realize that force is such a wider term that we can, you know, we could go into rabbit hole and look at that, because a fence around my horses is already a form of pressure and force. So where's the line? Is basically, that's my question I've asked myself over the last years. Where's the bloody line? Because it has to be somewhere. There has to be a balance. So not all training is always nice and easy, because I don't know about you, but I sometimes go to this physio guy who helps me with something like functional patterns and goes along that kind of direction. And it's really hard, strenuous work for my body and my brain to kind of wire myself to stand like this and move like that and do that. So, but I get the benefit of it. So it's not always nice and easy, but I get the benefit of it. And I try to approach horses from a similar kind of perspective, knowing that there can be a benefit, but it can also be hard for them to try. What I think where the line should be is when we go down and force them to do something when they clearly say I can't, or I won't. And I think we should always go and seek answers there, because there is some truth that needs to be found. And I think the line is also, so when we come to fawning, horses that fawn are often misunderstood for horses that show signs of relaxation. And I think it is very is that a word, contextual? So it really depends on the situation that we are in. If it is a relaxation, yawn, release, something like that, or whether it is, I'm overwhelmed right now, overstimulated, I want you to make it stop, please, you know, from that kind of side. And I think that's so individual that it's really hard to say this is the one way and this is the other. So we would always have to look at a situation and try and like take that apart and look at all the details. But I think the horses would be helped so much if everybody would start asking and questioning themselves and asking those questions in general, and ask, where is that line? What is my horse doing right now? Are they showing signs of relaxation? Are they really truly relaxed? Or are they completely shut down? Are they showing signs of fawning in that particular moment? And I think it is super interesting to look at situations. And even for me, looking back with Sun and Bee and all the other guys that I worked with, just thinking, okay, wow, but it's a way forward, right? So after you've had that, I've had this kind of crisis, and you're so right. I also pulled back a bit, and I try to analyze and come back to myself. But I did realize that eventually I do have that kind of truth within. I just need to allow it to unfold without wanting it to be or look like something in particular. So yeah, does that make sense at all? Sometimes I say a lot of stuff and then I'm like, wait, does that make sense?
No, that's how we roll. So yes, everything you said makes sense.
Awesome.
But also, yeah, and I started to realize, I think it was what I started to pay attention to within myself when I was making requests was where the energy was coming from, because I feel like I could do the exact same thing. Like when I have clients come in and I can feel that they either feel like they're second guessing themselves, or they're feeling nervous about it, or sometimes not even feeling worthy enough to request things because of whatever beliefs they kind of have going. And I sort of try to identify, okay, like the energy behind it is either going to be closed off or open. I can give you the exact maneuver to do with your horse and you can have perfect timing. But if you're feeling a way about it, their response is going to be completely different. Yeah. And so that's kind of why I dove into the people side, because I was like, well, we can't get anywhere unless we deal with this. But how much of that do you feel like impacts that piece where, you know, the person is feeling away and then they're engaging with their horse and that stuff kind of gets mixed up?
How much of the person plays a role in the interaction? 100%. So, yeah, I think 100%. I said something at the beginning of sometimes people being too close to the animal or the person to see those blind spots. I think that also plays a role. But again, it takes the owner to want to dive into these things and want to connect with themselves and want to ask those difficult questions, as much as they might hurt. I mean, I don't, you know, it's not easy breezy for me all the time. I don't think for anyone, but being honest about it and seeing what comes back, what resonates back with the horses. And they're really good at being authentic and showing what happens in that particular moment. We just have to be brave and ask, I think. But yeah, 100%. If you're off on a particular day and you're wanting them to perform, to put it drastically, that's not going to go very well. It's not going to go. Yeah, I don't think that's going to go the desired direction in that particular moment. Yeah. But then not everybody is open enough, I think, to say, oh, shit, that's me. Actually, I need to reflect on that particular moment. You just grazed there for a second. I will quickly consider what just happened here. You know, most people will go stupid horse, or they will go, you know, we've done this a million times. Why does it not work today? And they kind of start to go into that blaming spiral, also with themselves, which is also not helpful, I think. Yeah.
Definitely. I love this conversation because just recently over the last year, Amber and I have been talking about what the horses have called the Great Awakening. And I've seen it in a bunch of different, like it's in other animal communicators or intuitives have said the same thing in different ways. But for me as a communicator, it's just so interesting because um, I have been talking with several horses who are kind of like on the leading edge of this. And one of my own horses has really given me a lot of lessons. And basically, it's this shift. I think we can all speak to the shift that's happening in the equine industry, but it's all based around entitlement and not
Mm-hmm.
feeling entitled to another's body, state of being, emotional state, whatever. And I have this horse, Biggie, who is constantly making things difficult for me because he's like, is this for you or is it for me? Because if it truly is for the horse, let's say, like, so for him, he doesn't like any sort of body work, right? And when you think about like wanting to do certain things with your horse or asking them to do a certain thing, if I asked him to do a certain thing and it was truly about him doing it or not would not make me feel any sort of way. But as
Mm-hmm.
humans, we totally are asking our horses to do something with us or for us because on the inside, we believe we'll feel better in asking for it. So it always ends up being about us. And it's
Yeah.
just been so interesting to like play around with that concept and try to find that balance in like the entitlement piece and even just like feeding them. Like, you know, I'll have clients come to me and they're like, oh, my horse won't eat the supplement. And I'm like, well, if it was really up to them and you truly are wanting to do it for them, it wouldn't matter to you whether they eat the supplement or not. But there's something in there that is keeping you and it's searching for those answers. And just
Yes.
like speaking to this like last piece of fawning that I'm curious about, because I really do think that the more you learn, the more your expectations change. And I'm curious if this has changed for you as well, because Amber and I don't really ride our horses anymore. Like we will sometimes if we're feeling inspired, but it's just so interesting because the more we learn, the less we need to ride. Or I feel like the more I'm aware of subtle things my horses are telling me, the more I'm like, oh, you're not ready to ride, or we have all this other stuff to unpack. And for me, I think a lot of it was, you know, the way I was raised at the majority of us, like, oh, don't touch that, don't do that. So then when we work with our horses, instead of like redirecting them in a way that feels good, we're like, no, that's not the right answer. And it creates all
Mm-hmm.
these different experiences. But how often do you ride your horses? And like the more you learn, do you feel like that has shifted for you?
Sorry. That's such a good question because I joke about this with my friends a lot. I have actually not ridden in a very long time, and I try to. I never ask my horse for a ride with any of them. So I have three, and I never ask any of them for a ride if I haven't kind of put in the amount of work and effort it takes on the ground. And I don't mean lunging them for hours and doing that kind of stuff, but trying to feel into them and trying to give them a feel for their own body and seeing how comfortable they feel in particular movements. I judge if I then ride or not, or yeah, I kind of try and do that, but I've not ridden them in such a long time. I sat on Rubio this week, but I was off sick for 2 weeks now, and before then I sat on him maybe twice, and that's this year. So we're now in the 1st of April, and I've ridden him maybe like 4 times, and my mare Sun once, and she used to be my main riding horse. Excuse me. But yeah, as she got older and she had a really tough year after her friend died, and she had various accidents and all of that. So I didn't really get to the riding stage. But it's not like I've never been the kind of person to go round and round the arena. I mean, I don't have one now, but go round and round the arena and practice movements and micromanage my horses. That's not what I want. I want to experience and explore things with them. And sometimes that will be in the arena, which is now like a grassy paddock. Sometimes it will be that, but most of the times it will be going out on a walk, and I tack them up, but I walk for probably 75% of the route. And then sometimes I will get on and let them carry me for a bit. And if I feel like, oh, you're a bit off today, I get off again. And I have no shame in saying that. Yeah, and like you said, it's much more about the actual communication and connection side of things for me now. It's more about finding that connection and finding connection in the little quiet moments. It doesn't have to be big and bold all the time. It very often is going out for feeding times and just sitting there with a cup of coffee whilst they're eating the hay, for example, and just being with the horses and being immersed in that herd, which is so empowering and beautiful to me. Yeah. But yeah, with the riding, I mean, I love riding. Don't get me wrong, I do love riding, and I want to do more of it again this year. But yeah, it hasn't been top of the list. It hasn't been for a while.
I have a couple clinics and I take my horses different places during the summer. And so I've just pulled them out like a day and a half ago or whatever, and started doing just groundwork with them and checking. I was like, oh, they're also sound. And I think, I swear it's because, well, my one mare was lame for quite a while. And you find that like people just obsess, like my horse is off, my horse is off. And it's really hard to not do that, while it's happening. And I know she had an abscess, so I was soaking it. It was like this whole thing. And she was still kind of off. And I was like, you know what? Like, I'm just literally going to put her out, and I'm going to pick her feet at night, and I'm going to look the other way for like, I was like probably like 2 weeks or something. And I pulled her out the other day and they were good. And I was like, I know what happens when I start to work them again is like, then I'm diving back into, like, it's really easy for me to go, oh, I know I have it all figured out. It's so great because you're not in it. And then I know when I'm pulling them back out to do that, all this stuff starts to bubble up and I start to question. And I walked all three of them. Like, I did groundwork and then I walked them around our property. And like, as I was walking them around the property, it was like I had these realizations. And I think that's what sort of happens when people start spending time with their horses and they're not actively asking them for things, but you're in that space. And there's something about the energy of like whatever they do, especially the ones that you have that are really connected with you. And especially if you're doing work like this, where you're going out and sharing stuff, right? So, and I'm walking and I'm realizing Shaylee and I had just done a workshop and we were talking about open heart, closed heart and staying open and using boundaries to be able to do that. And on and on. And I was like, you know what? Like, I don't think this was a day, 2 days ago. I was like, I don't think like, even with my horses, and this is my horse Smarty, who won't shut down, but will fight. I was like, I don't think I've ever fully been able to open my heart, even in the presence of my actual horses. And it was like, and he was like, yep. And I was like, oh, and like, so you have these like huge like things happen. I was like, oh shit. And so I start walking and I'm like, trying to, what part of my, where I'm like, we just taught this. Like, how could this be? That's not it. Surely somewhere in my life. And I was like, not even with my horses. And he was like, yep, that's where we're at now.
Yeah.
And I was like, so it's like, I think that piece when you take the writing and you take the goals and it gets scary for people because then all of a sudden this other stuff comes up that you can't ignore. You can't focus, you can't do a flying lead change, or, your horse isn't working the cow right. Because all of a sudden you're just sitting with yourself and they're like, here, let me deliver you this message now. Now let's do this. And it's like, oh God.
Yeah.
So
shit, where did that come from? Like,
yeah.
It can be quite daunting, I think, if you start to open up to all these possibilities of what else there is and how much of it is actually within yourself and not with the horse. And so when Bee died, she had a colic, and Sun and Bee have always been. So Sun came to the UK with me. Bee joined us, and it was from the start they were best friends. But with her and me, we had this problem. But Sun and her have always been like always together, and it was the most beautiful thing to witness over 9 years. The way they were with each other. So when Bee died, Sun had a few accidents, and I started to look at her differently as well. I started to look at her with worry in my eyes every time and it's just me going out a few doors and opening the door and basically seeing the herd. But I came out with what's it going to be today? And I didn't even realize I was doing this until it's so I was constantly sending signals of something's not okay here, something must be wrong, like it's not safe, and I was the one bringing that, and I didn't even realize that until I also dove more into this nervous system stuff and everything that has to do with us, and how much of it actually was me. When one day she she looked at me, and she had this really soft, she has beautiful eyes, and she had this really soft look on her face, and I looked at her like this, and all of a sudden her eyes changed like this, and I thought, oh my god, she's actually just mirroring me. So I had an epiphany like that. I stood there like, surely this cannot just be me. And she was like, oh, okay, you know, it's like she was doing this big exhale, like finally she got it. And it was ages I was doing this for. And I kept looking at her through the lens of, I have to rehab her. And like, how harsh is that, to always look at someone and say, you're not right, I have to rehab you into a better way, or some on such a deep, profound level that is me rejecting her the way she is. And I bring that to the conversation the whole time. I bring to the conversation, you're not okay the way you are, I have to fix you, I have to make you better. And I do want my horses to be sound. It's in the name. So of course soundness plays a role, but soundness to me is so much more than just a horse that's not lame. It's the spiritual side of things, the emotional side of things, the mental and the physical. But it's all, everything is together, and it has to be, because yeah, otherwise I just pick on things and I reject her basically. Yeah, that was a biggie for me as well. So I totally get that. Totally get that. Yeah, so now I try to change that.
Well, and it's really easy to get into that space. You sound very similar to me, actually, because my horse Kip is like the one that changed everything for me. And it's only maybe in the last 2 years where I realized I've been so critical of him. And it's like, oh, I want to change him out of love because I feel responsible for his state of being and responsible for his body. And there is like that criticism. And then I have Biggie, who, like how you're saying, B, really, you guys butted heads. I used to say that Biggie and I had a personality conflict because he's just so like, everything I try to do with him, he like meets me with so much love on one end and then like so much no on the other. And he's such a brute. And I've always called him a horse for my horses because my horses freaking love him. They're so connected to him. And I'm like, he's like my little personality conflict horse. But I feel like, yeah, it's just so interesting how I'm listening to you talk and I'm like, wow, that sounds like my story. And I am someone who has a lot of self-criticism, and I've always dealt with like chronic muscle pain or chronic tension in my body. And the more I dive into that like criticism, the more my own body softens. And the other day, I've been doing so much work around it. The other day I like was on my yoga mat and I bent down to touch my toes and I was like, what? Like this has never been able to happen in like 30
you
years.
Could do it.
Like this is so cool. So yeah, it's really interesting how that stuff unwinds. And I'm curious too, because, well, side note, but not really a side note. For those listening who have not found Steffi yet, she has an Instagram where she posts these like before and after videos. And I totally use them as like a little test for myself because I do a lot of my work intuitively, remotely through just a photograph. And I had to spend a lot of time not analyzing the photograph because it could be 3 years old and I'm connecting to an energy that's in the present moment. And I've never really done a lot of work in person or over video. So it's so cool to see your videos. And I will, most recently, I just, the last one I did, you had a horse that was getting fly spray on a brush. And I could just feel that he was like apprehensive to touch. And there was like this energy around it. And I just think it's so cool, the videos that you do and how you're educating the public. And I was working with my horse Fern the other day. I know this is like a long-winded thing, but it has a point to it. I have a little 3-year-old and I always leave her at liberty. So like she has trouble picking up her feet, she's got some body stuff going on. So I would rather her be able to walk away in the middle of me trimming her foot rather than me like asking her to stand there. Well, I wanted to do a little demonstration video for a friend of mine, and all it was going to be was I was going to touch like certain areas of her back, and she didn't want that. And I was like, I kind of need to use you for this video, so I'm going to put a halter on you. And it's so interesting because the old me would have been like, you're so impatient, you're just such a baby, like, oh my gosh. And the more I look at like your videos and I'm learning and stuff, and the more I dive into my own work, I put this halter on her and she was immediately like, what is going to happen to me? Like, you don't do this. That
Oh,
just little subtle change made such a difference for her. And by me asking her, like, she'd take a step forward and the camera was over here, so I'd, put my hand on her chest and ask her to take a step back. And then she stress pooped. And I was like, how sad is this? Like, I had to end the video and take off the halter. But it's just so interesting how learning that, well, for one, so I'm curious, like, now that you've given your horses more choice and stuff, like, how do you notice like those little tiny things affecting them? Because before I would just be like, oh, she's anxious or she wants to go back to her food or whatever. But the more you learn, the more you're like, these are insanely deeply feeling beings that like are routine oriented, and they really feel that energy. Like, I swear she felt the energy of me being like, we have to take this video. I feel
this
like she
has
just
to
got that
happen.
energy of like, yeah, I have no choice and something's going to happen to me and I don't know what. So yeah, do you notice that in your experience?
Yes and no. I think yes to a degree, but because I have always given them these kind of choices, I think I have very clear boundaries, and I think that is something that's always very consistent. So my horses know a yes and a no, and they know the frame that I'm totally cool with them, working in when we are in this kind of context. So yeah, I did notice a few things. For example, my gelding Rubio, he's on a lot of those videos because he actually sent me down the spiral of the fawning, dissociation, shutdown kind of side of things, because he is showing so much of that. And it changed totally the moment I started honoring that, and the moment I started to go, okay, he's not relaxing. He needs this time to, he's kind of switching off in that moment. And he is, so we would be, for example, lunging, or we're doing some loose work, and he's super engaged and always like on point, and he loves to play basically. So I can just throw a question at him and he'll do it, because he loves exploring and playing with his body like that. But there was a point when I noticed, okay, and then he just stops, and he just stops in his tracks, and then he will just switch off. And normally my instinct would have been to no, just keep going, keep going. That was great. And now I've started to not do that. And because he knows in that frame, it's okay to express and it's safe to express, he does that. And he will take more time to do that. And I noticed this now. So I was just off for 2 weeks because I was basically just lying around trying to recover from whatever that was. But he then always regresses back to a stage where he not forces me, but where he kind of like, where he insists, like, no, we are having it this way. And he needs more stops. He needs more time to shut down. And I don't judge it. I just let it happen. And as soon as he feels safe to connect again, he's back, and he just happily canters on, or whatever it is. It's a really strange thing. But I noticed that he is kind of insisting on more of that side of expressing himself now that he has the opportunity to do so. Less so that I sent them into stress pooping, like so like with your horse. So, but what a beautiful way for you to put that into a perception, and like look at it from that perspective basically, and see, okay, this is already for her, this is already one step maybe too far, without explaining that step in a different way first. And yeah, I think by honoring that in our horses, in the communication with our horses, we can become so much more nuanced with them. We can connect on such a more profound level with them. It really has been such a game changer for everything.
I feel like where I really struggled with when I was training outside horses was this idea that I knew that I had this certain amount of time. And I knew that the time with me was going to set them up to either be able to like go off and do the things like if I had a really green horse, or I had a horse that had problems with pulling back or whatever. It's like the horse trainers that are out there starting to make shifts within their business are bumping up against these time constraints and then having to go, can I stay in integrity and know I can make a difference in this horse's life right now, expand their ability and their capacity to handle the stress in a way where it still feels good to them. And so it was like, I stopped training outside horses because I was like, I don't know where that line is anymore. Like, I know that I want and need horses to trailer, to tie, to pick their feet up. Even when I think about mine, or I look at horses where people will bring their horses and go, we don't tie them. They just, they ground tie. And, I'm like, right. But if something happens to you, you know what I mean? That's what something happens to me. Can this horse go out and be functional with anyone? Can they handle being tied? Can they handle someone that's going to, and so it was like this, I struggled a lot with that, like the balance of how can I set them up to go out into the real world beyond where they are with me now. And there's a lot of trainers that are starting to make shifts, but that are also like, well, like, what do? We only have, this amount of time, and what is going to best serve this horse? And it's such a tricky thing. So yeah, that just
Totally. The last horse that I took in training was last year, April. Actually, exactly a year ago today, he arrived in my
It
lab.
actually might be a year for me too.
Yeah.
Right? Oh, I have to look. That's so weird. Yeah.
Yeah, look that up. So exactly 1 year ago, and he was here for 2 months, but I did this thing with his owner. So I'm kind of vetting the owners that I work with, because like you say, where is that line for that horse? How can we best serve the horse and help the horse? And this is my aim as well, to help the horse succeed in life, basically. And that doesn't mean shutting them down. It doesn't mean allowing them to walk all over people. There has to be a balance, and helping them to find that balance within their body, mind, spirit, all of that. But also explaining that to the owner. So I always vet the owners, and I try and make them understand, look, if your horse is not able to, progress in 2 months the way that we have a goal, yes, but if we just got stuck here after 2 months, then this is what it's going to be, because I'm not going to push him more than he needs to be pushed, and not in general at all, actually. That's not my style. So I'm not going to push a horse beyond a certain point. If I feel like there is some resistance, we're always going to look at, why is there resistance? And I was just so lucky with that owner, but it's been a year. So I'm very particular about who gets to bring the horses into this space, because again, I have to also protect the peace of my own herd and my own environment here. So if I bring somebody in, I want to make sure that the people and the horses go with the same kind of flow. But I was extremely lucky with that one. So yeah. But I get it. It's a tough call. It's a really tough call to try and find that balance and make sure that the horses are succeeding afterwards as well. Because it's great if they can do it with you or with any of us, but they have to be okay in the real world with their owners as well. Yeah.
Do you notice a certain pattern that shows up the most? Like, do horses offer, is it typically like disassociation the most, or is there, and I guess I'm speaking more specifically to the videos that you post on Instagram, because those are so cool. And we're going to put your Instagram in the show notes of this. And hopefully everyone goes and follows you and like looks at all of your before and afters, because they're so educational, because you can totally look at an eye of a horse and you're like, oh, they're so relaxed. And sometimes I do it too, where I'll have like this notion of what I think, and then you post the next thing and I'm like, ah, shit, I got a C- on this one. Like, I definitely thought that horse was relaxed or whatever. So is there typically a behavior that you've noticed just in general that they will offer more than others, or an expression, I guess I should say?
I think the thing that really got me and was scary for me at some point, once I started looking through the lens of safety and connection, was seeing how much horses and humans are in survival mode the whole time. And to witness that and to see when they're kind of slipping in and out of survival mode, whenever I say that, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but we have to be conscious and we have to become aware of these things in order to work with them. And I think that's what I've noticed, that more often than not, people and the horses are in survival and less connected with themselves, but also with each other. And trying to find that balance of, okay, how much are we in survival? How much are we actually connected? How much are we feeling safe? That has been really, really interesting to dive into that and work with people on that. But then again, it takes a particular horse owner or a particular type of person, like I said earlier on, to be willing to actually open up to that and ask those difficult questions and look beyond what we want to see. And I think for a lot of my clients and students that I work with, I think for a lot of them, that has been a really tough sort of awakening in a particular way. To realize, okay, actually, I wasn't really connected. I wasn't giving my horses safety in that moment. I was totally sending them into survival myself, and to notice that, I think that has been probably a challenge for a lot of people. But I love working with people on this stuff because I think it's so profound. And then once you got it and once you understand, okay, this is the fight, the flight, freeze, fawn, when is the horse shut down? When is the horse actually relaxed? And once you understand that in your own horse, you can much more quickly actually mirror back on yourself and reflect and go, oh, actually, okay, you're right. I am not here myself. Let's get back. Let's get grounded. Let's breathe for a second. And then you can see the horse going, whew, okay, now we're back. And then you can try again. You can try that same exercise again and see how that comes up for you. But yeah, that's probably the one thing I've noticed. Much more often than not, we are not connected. We are in survival. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Many of us are very disassociated. I was curious about that, like if they show a lot of disassociation or anticipation, because I feel like we as humans very rarely live actually truly in the moment, where we don't have that little chatter going on in our heads, where we're not thinking about what needs to happen in 5 minutes or what needs to happen later, or we're anticipating. Like I notice it even sometimes when I'm going to like halter Biggie, I'll feel like that energy in my chest where I'm like, oh, how's he going to receive the halter? And then I'm like, that's weird. I need to sit with that for a second before I go and halter him. And I was just curious, because I'm curious if you like did your videos like through binoculars and you were like way far away from the horse and they were just in their own little bubble, versus like I know their auras are so big, and as soon as we like enter that space, it really starts to intermingle with them. But yeah, so many of us are just living not present, and it's been like my mission the last couple of months to like be so present and be so aware of every time that voice comes in my head or every time I'm feeling a certain way. And let me tell you, it is like hard work, and that little voice pops up everywhere. And being truly present, even just in the sense, like when you think of Amber and I have had conversations before where she was feeling guilty about one of her horses in the rain, because she's like, oh, she hates the rain and sometimes I don't bring her in fast enough and she can't get out of it. And I was telling her that's so interesting to me, because some horses love it from a sensory awareness standpoint. Like it really grounds them. It brings awareness to their body in ways that like they haven't felt it before. And some horses really appreciate the sensation on their body. And I think about we as humans, like I just read something the other day, like if it was your last day on earth, would you really run from the rain, or would you stand in it and appreciate it and feel
Embrace
the sensations
it,
on your body? And and we really are not embracing life. Like we're moving from one pain point to another, from one disassociated state to another. So it's a cool conversation.
Yeah, such a good point. I mean, I'm lucky in that I have a few windows where I can see my herd and I can look out and I can be immersed in the kind of energy they radiate without having to enter that space. And I think, like you said, looking through the binoculars, looking at them like this, it was actually a a good metaphor for that, because when I see them, when I observe them, they are never dissociated or never, they don't fawn very much. You know, they're very grounded and present and just so calm all the time. There's hardly ever any, I mean, there's 4 horses in this herd, and there's hardly ever any galloping, squealing, there's nothing exaggerated, you know, nothing negative energy, nothing, I don't know, I can't even describe it. It's just very, very relaxed and such a peaceful atmosphere. I think that's it. It's so much peace. So when working with them, I mean, how many horses actually have the chance to live that peaceful life where they have freedom of choice, where they can go and walk and have a nibble over there and then go to the water and drink over here and then seek shelter or embrace the rain, whatever it is they want to do? How many horses actually get that choice and that life? So I think that in itself is such an interesting conversation, because when we work with our horses and when we come from this connection safety perspective, you know, if we don't offer them a life where they get to express and feel safe in their horsey environment, how can we expect them to connect with us in the horse human context? It's so interesting how, again, entitlement, how we feel like it has to be this way and it has to work for us. But yeah, that is a really interesting conversation in itself, probably.
No, there's long delays, so we don't want to talk over each other. Now we're just staring blankly.
Everybody is just staring.
Everyone's scared to talk now. So funny.
We're just putting into practice exactly what we're talking about with the horses. Like when there's, you know, you don't know what to expect, there's the anticipation. And like, I'm sure that on some level, we all feel that in our bodies. And I just love the way the universe works, because it's like, okay, you're putting your energy towards this subject. Like, let's put it actually into play in this podcast, and you can see how you feel about it.
Yeah.
So good.
Beautiful.
We're coming up on an hour. We want to be respectful of time. I don't know how that happens so fast. It happens every time. And we always say when we have guests on that we need to do a part 2, because I feel like this is always what happens. And there's like 6,000 more directions we could go and so many more. We just have the coolest people on our podcast.
I feel honored.
Shirley, do you have any? I know you had a big old long list. So is there anything that you have like a burning desire to get out before we wrap up?
I don't think so. I feel like that felt really great. I just want everybody to go to your Instagram and start looking at your videos, because I feel like they're so invaluable. And so, are you still doing your special for your dog? Because I feel like that's something that, like, if our listeners want to dive into that, like, what are your current offerings and how are you feeling about all of that stuff?
Do you want me to share is that what you mean? How am I feeling about it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I actually, well, today is technically the cutoff point, but it's still open. So I could leave that open for another 24 hours. But my general offerings are a membership that I do, and people can book in one-on-one sessions and work with me on either videos or live with the horses and dive into all of these nuances that we spoke about today. But I think the membership, the Inner Circle membership, is a cool place to start because it's an easy entry. You can just join and dive into videos and topics yourselves, and then basically when you feel ready, book your session. But I think, yeah, the Inner Circle is a pretty amazing place. It's a really lovely community of, I always say, like-minded horse enthusiasts that want to explore these questions, and it's a safe space. So everybody who wants to be in there is more than welcome to join us. And yeah, that's pretty much it. One-on-one sessions and the Inner Circle. And I'm hoping that there will be some clinics in the future, but for now, there is that.
Perfect. So we'll put all the links for that in the show notes for everyone who is interested. I will do my best to get this edited and uploaded so people can watch it immediately. And then if the doors, you said the doors close tonight, you said, for the newest program you have?
I did a special of the grommet specials because both my dogs actually went really, really, really sick, and I had 4 weeks of battling for their health and at the same time horrendous costs. So I did this special to help with that cost that I had to pay out. But so I can leave that open for another 24 hours. It's just two little bundles. There's a small and a large bundle if people want to dive into that. But I'm happy with the inner circle and the one-on-one sessions.
Awesome. So good. Well, it was so fun to meet you and talk to you and get to know you. And we will have to do a part 2, I think.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such an honor to be here, and I was looking forward to this, and you guys, you were awesome. So thank you so much for hosting me as well.